Yo, what's up, Ghost here. Today I am bringing you guys another comparison video between the Bar and Bren. Now, I've been wanting to make a Bren comparison for a while. I feel like it's been a few weeks since I mentioned that I wanted to get into the Bren, and it's taken me a bit for multiple reasons. But pretty much ever since this gun started to become meta, I've noticed that this gun was being used a lot, and I was like, yo, I gotta get on that. Unfortunately, it's taken me this long to finally get on it, but here we are making this comparison. And again, man, the Bren at the moment is, without a doubt, considered the best primary in the game. I do think the Bar can compete with it, and that's what we're talking about today. That's why we're here. And in general, I just feel like the Bar is a weapon that's being, or just has been, overshadowed for whatever reason. Because I think it's really good. A lot of people acknowledge that it's really good, yet I feel like it's still getting overshadowed by other guns. The Bren isn't an exception because the Bren is really, really good, but I feel like the Bar doesn't get talked about as much as it should be. But anyways, man, before we do get into the comparison, I want to say if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We're up to 2,000. We're about 100, less than 120 subs away, so every sub does help. And yeah, man, that being said, let's get into the comparison. And here we have the recoil pattern for the Bar, which, as you guys can see, is a pretty simple recoil pattern. It literally goes straight up. But don't be fooled by this, because just because it has a simple recoil pattern does not mean that it's like a complete zero recoil, easy to control weapon, because that's not the case at all. This weapon, I'm not saying it's the hardest gun to control, but it definitely isn't the easiest that you can have, and one where you'll just be able to pick it up and be able to control it. You need to be careful, because this weapon has like this aspect of, I don't know what to call it, bobbling or just bounces, where every time you shoot it starts to slowly, like, it goes up, but it doesn't make it so you're literally shooting into the sky. It just, as you're shooting, you're holding down your trigger, like, the bobbling animation just kind of makes it hard to hit shots sometimes. And when you had Bloom in the game, like, bro, forget, like, this gun, it was still good because of the damage, but when there was Bloom, bro, it at times could be really hard to hit shots. And even without Bloom, it's pretty difficult, I would say, if you're not, like, mounted. Because if you're mounted, this gun is amazing. There's going to be a few clips in here where I mount with the Bar, or maybe just one, where, like, bro, it straight up melts people. When you're not mounted, though, you can still obviously hit shots, but it's a little bit tougher just because of, like, the bobbling. I don't know if that's like a visual thing, intentional, but that to me is one of the things that throws me off when using this weapon. But obviously the saving grace of this weapon is the damage, because if you were to hit all headshots at a certain range, you could literally 5-shot somebody with this Bar. And given how it starts to kind of go up when you're shooting, I wouldn't say hitting headshots is like the hardest thing to do with this weapon. And on top of the fact that it has a slow fire rate, this weapon just, I mean, listen, I think it's the perfect competition for a Bren. Now, granted, when we get into the stats and whatnot, you might, say that it's not, but I just think that this gun should get more credit than it deserves. Granted, I do think it does, like, people do talk about it, people do use it, and people acknowledge that it's good, but, like, I feel like this is easily the second option behind the Bren, and yet I feel like it's not being used as the second option. I could be wrong, because, I'm not really up to date with the game as much as I used to be. Because, I've just been busy. I've just been, I'm not on, like, in this whole Warzone world every day, all day. Like, I just, when I'm in it, and I try to, like, keep up with the time, especially for these type of videos. So, it may be getting more credit than I'm, making it out to be, which, makes sense. But I just feel like from what I've seen and from when I watch YouTube videos or when I watch streamers, like, it's just not getting the recognition. But, I could always obviously be wrong. But yeah, man, the Bar, really good, and we're just going to get into the stats in Bren. So let's do it. And then we have the recoil pattern for the Bren, which as you guys can see is very similar to the Bar. Simple and pretty much goes straight up. But I will say that this weapon is a lot easier to control than the Bar. It doesn't have like some weird bobbling or just moving around animation when you're shooting it, because the fire rate isn't as slow. So it's like a smooth, fully automatic weapon. Whereas like the Bar, even though it's fully automatic, it just doesn't feel like it's fully automatic. That's how slow the fire rate is. But yeah, man, from my experience of going up against this weapon, or even just using this weapon at range, it was a lot easier to use the Bren. And obviously the damage still matches up. It's not as strong as the Bar in certain ranges, which we'll get into in a second. But damage is still, it's still popping, bro. Like, it's still good enough to the point where I can see why people still or consider this weapon to be the #1 in the game. But the Bar, man, I'm telling you guys, keep on that Bar. Anyways, man, for the first stat that we want to talk about, or we're going to talk about, is the fire rate, which for the bar we have a 400 RPM, and to be honest, I actually thought it was going to be a little bit lower than that. 400 RPM seems kind of generous to me when talking about the bar, because the bar really, like, it actually feels slow. It feels so slow that, like I said, that gun doesn't feel fully automatic. It actually feels like semi-automatic, without, like, being able to go crazy with your trigger finger. And then for the Bren fire rate, we have 600 RPM. Now, typically 600 RPM isn't the craziest in terms of fire rate, but when we're talking about in this specific comparison, 400 versus 600, like that's a huge, just significant difference between fire rate. And obviously the Bren here in the situation does have the advantage of fire rate, which is actually very important considering how close in damage they both are. Which, speaking of damage, let's just move on over there. This is what's gonna get spicy, bro, because the damage is, man, it's an interesting conversation to be had. So for the bar at 0 to 36 meters, we have 60 damage to the head, and then 44 to the neck, chest, stomach, and extremities. So already off rip, the bar, as you guys can see, man, really, really strong, which is no surprise if you've used the weapon. And then for the Bren, for 0 to 45 meters, we have 51 damage to the head, 47 to the neck, 37 to the chest and stomach, and then lastly 34 for the extremities. Which, as you guys can see, man, off rip, you can hear from the stats that you heard, the bar has the advantage in damage except for the neck at, I would say, like close to medium range. I don't know, 0 to 36, 0 to 45 meters. I would say that's like, you know, close medium range. And you know, the only thing that's saving the Bren in this situation is the obvious fire rate difference here. Because the bar, man, literally, if you're able to hit all your headshots, you're 5-shotting somebody. You're straight up 5-shotting somebody. And that's something crazy to think about, considering how, I wouldn't say it's easy to hit headshots with the bar, but the fact that it's so slow in fire rate, you're bound to get 1 or 2 headshots when you're shooting at someone, especially if you're like above them. And you know, just hitting headshots with this gun, I wouldn't think it's the hardest. And just in general, like, if you just look back at what I just said, chest and stomach, 44 damage to that, in comparison to the 37 that the Bren has, those are 2 of the most common places you're going to hit someone in this game. So to have that advantage in damage is just absurd. And, you know, obviously here, going back to the fact that, yes, the bar is able to compete with this weapon. But anyways, moving on over to the long range, which can get a little weird, considering what I mentioned earlier. But anyways, so 36 meters and above for the bar, we have 46 damage to the head, 34 to the neck, chest, stomach, and extremities. And then for 45 meters and above for the Bren, we have 45 damage to the head, 42 to the neck, 33 to the chest and stomach, and 30 to the extremities. Now this is where, you know, the damage gets even more interesting, because now the damage advantage for the bar kind of disappears. And in fact, I would say it's even at a disadvantage, because the Bren still maintains a pretty high damage, especially in the neck area, whereas the bar completely falls off. But the bar does still have its high headshot damage, even having an advantage by 1 damage profile. But like I mentioned earlier, I still think the bar is a lot easier to use at longer ranges. It's, I would say, you're going to have more success at range with the Bren than the bar. And that's even with that. If you take away the stats, if you take away everything else, it's just, personally, from what I've used and from what I've experienced against, the bar seems to, the Bren seems to always be really solid at range. Whereas the bar, like, if you're not mounted, it can get really weird and you start becoming very inaccurate, or at least I start becoming very inaccurate at those ranges. And I guess that's probably why people kind of have abandoned the bar and for like a Bren, and why the bar hasn't really like taken off as the #1 gun. Which again, the bar is still really good, and I still stand by the fact that it could be the substitute for the Bren if the Bren was to get nerfed. Because if we're being realistic, if they're gonna make another nerf soon, the Bren is gonna be definitely on top of that list. I think the bar maybe might receive a nerf, but given the fact that the Bren is all that's talked about, all that people are using in the meta, that is currently the one that is most recognized as right now, this Bren is probably next in line to receive a nerf. I would not be surprised within the next week, maybe 2 weeks, or just in general, when we get the next big update for weapon patches, that the Bren will be getting the nerf. Now the bar, again, I could see it getting nerfed too. Maybe like a damage nerf. I don't think they will do another recoil nerf. I feel like if they did another recoil nerf, it would be kind of weird. But I just think it's more likely that the Bren, or basically what I'm trying to say is that the Bren will more likely receive a nerf, and that the bar will take its place. But at the moment, although I am a big bar fan, and given the fact that I have not used the Bren with full attachments, I'm gonna have to say that yes, the bar is extremely good, but the Bren still edges out, barely edges out in the comment section for best gun of the game. But anyways, man, with that being said, man, let me know what you guys think about both these weapons. Which one do you prefer and why? And I'll talk to you guys in the next one. I'm out. Peace.